I finally saw A Haunting in Venice, and I can say it's okay. The genre is kind of interesting because it's definitely a mystery film, but with horror elements in there, and it kind of feels like a gateway horror film. But I'll talk more about that in a moment. To be honest, I'm not the biggest fan of Poirot as a character. I've seen the other Branagh Poirot films and they're absolutely fine, but I wasn't particularly enthusiastic about this. But I do love Tina Fey. I love Tina Fey, so I was kind of excited about that. Didn't really know what to expect, and as I said, it's not too bad. This was released last year in 2023. It is, of course, directed by Branagh and written by Michael Green, loosely based, apparently, on Christie's novel Halloween Party. I haven't read it. If you have any thoughts on how they compare, please feel free to provide me with some more information about that. And it stars Kenneth Branagh as Poirot. And of course, we have Tina Fey. And I will say, if you're a Tina Fey fan and that's why you're interested in it, she's in it a lot, which is not something I was certain would be the case, but she is. She's in it a decent amount. And this takes place in Venice in the 1940s after the war. And this is focusing at the beginning on a seance. And the seance is supposed to be revealing information about somebody who has passed away. And during the seance, there is a murder. And I like the fact that there were several things here. It's not just focusing on the things that happened during the seance, but also things that happened before that. And whether or not they're connected, of course, I'm not going to say, but I think that there's a decent amount of meat in this narrative that it kept me interested throughout. Now, that's not to say that I found it completely gripping and compelling all of the way through. It definitely did slow down at times, but I never felt bored, but I didn't always feel excited by the narrative. And I didn't necessarily always care about who was responsible. And when it comes to mysteries, I think it really depends on the viewer or the reader really wanting to know what has happened. And yes, for the most part, I did want to know, and no, I didn't work it out. But there were times when I just thought, I'm not really that bothered. So it didn't captivate my attention the entire way, but enough to keep me interested. So the story itself, pretty decent. For me, unpredictable. I quite liked it. As for the horror aspect, it's not a scary film, but there are scary moments. And there are some jump scares and some pretty atmospheric scenes, but I feel like it's quite few and far between. So if you're new to horror, or if you're not a particularly big horror fan, but you don't mind being scared a little bit, I think this film is good for that. And I feel like for somebody who's trying to get into horror, and if you like mysteries, of course, it would also be a good stepping stone as well. So for me personally, I would have liked it to have been a little bit scarier, but at the same time, with Poirot, we're not usually getting a lot of horror in there. So it was still quite refreshing and a little bit different to other Poirot films, and I think it worked quite well. I think they managed to get enough horror in there for it to be scary without it feeling not like a Poirot film, if that makes sense. The performances are good, the narrative is interesting enough, the horror elements I quite liked. As I said, I wasn't fully engaged all of the way through. There were times when I wasn't as invested in the narrative as I would have liked to have been, but I liked it. It's a good film. I wouldn't watch it again. Well, Tina Fey, maybe I would. I wouldn't watch it again in a hurry. Maybe one day. But if you've been thinking about watching it and you haven't, I'd say it's worth it. I'm glad I waited until it was on Disney Plus. It is on Disney Plus now, of course, and I'd say it's worth checking out if you're generally a fan of Poirot or Kenneth Branagh or Tina Fey or anybody else who's in it. It's certainly a good film.